As a 6'6", 205-pound lead guard, Kasparas Jakucionis is one of the most exciting prospects in this year's draft, and the most exciting from the Barcelona system and Lithuania as well in quite some time. In his first 14 games with the University of Illinois, Jakucionis has impressed scouts with his averages of 16.5 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, and 5.4 assists per game, making him one of the most statistically great freshmen, if not the most, in the country. And all the while, he shot Illinois up the top 25 rankings, beaten tough opponents, and shot 50-40-90, the hallmark for efficiency in the process. And he's been quietly discussed as potentially the most impressive freshman so far in this college basketball cycle, and the film will certainly show that he's one of the most exciting as well. He hasn't really scraped the first tier of prospects as far as mock drafts go, but has largely been a consensus top 5 guy in every mock I've seen so far. The Lithuanian guard has truly demonstrated how he could potentially be an instant contributor at the next level, and we'll get into it when we look at the film. And although he doesn't have the athleticism of some of the premier guys in this draft like Ace Bailey or Cooper Flagg, his on-ball creation and technical skill is among the best this class has to offer, and I wouldn't be surprised if his hype only continues to grow as we get into March and beyond. But with that being said, let's take an early look at Kasparas Jakucionis. So I would go as far as to say that Jakucionis' most valuable skill that he showcased as a player so far this season has been his ability to hit tough shots and create for himself in general. The Illinois offense essentially runs through him completely, and with that high usage rate comes the adequate patience and buy-in from his teammates to allow Jakucionis to break down his defenders in isolation and using screens. But not only does he have the requisite skills to do so, he's hyper efficient, making him not only a go-to guy, but someone logically you would hope takes tough shots when the play breaks down. And per synergy, he's taking shots off the dribble more than 95% of D1 players in terms of relative shot diet, and he's converting at a rate more efficient than 96% as well, at an insane 45% pure field goal percentage with a 63% effective field goal percentage. And so considering that he's taking these shots more than most players in the country, but also hitting them at a rate higher than most players in the country, we're looking at a really, really elite shot maker. And he's got a tight handle as well, and is shifty enough to work his way around defenders, and pairing that with his great footwork, he can escape size-ups for deeps and contested threes. Jakucionis is one of the most adept pure shot makers off the dribble at the college level that I've evaluated in my time scouting draft prospects, and like I said, the footwork is immaculate. He's got great escape moves, being step backs, side steps, or simple moves to pick up his dribble and fade away, and he's elite at getting teammates involved in his self-creation as well, which although it may seem like an oxymoron, getting teammates involved in isolation scoring, watch how he can use his big to get a two-man game going through DHOs, screening, re-screening, or get actions. This is something that I can definitely see translating for Jakucionis at the next level, as even though defenders will certainly be better, he'll get better screens and more space as well to work with, and bigs will have better ideas of how to work with guards well. And so one interesting consideration about his jumper is the lack of an off-ball acumen that I don't know he's necessarily displayed so far, and he's only shooting a catch-and-shoot jumper 2% of the time, relatively. And so, however, I would say given his strong mechanics and solid percentage he's shooting, I definitely think he's going to be fine, although I do wonder what his commitment level might be in a system where he's not as active on the ball. However, I don't know if that's necessarily a worthy consideration, because he hasn't really been asked to do it. And so nonetheless, I think the ability to make difficult shots will more than adequately get you paid in the NBA. And so I think it's the easiest source of upside for Jakucionis as a prospect.
That spacing being off by just another stride. One of the reasons Purdue was able to lock down Alabama on Friday night.
You know what else jumped out to me about that Purdue game? Behind Paul Gallen Fieldhouse, Mackey basketball with and without the ball.
So Sherrell's got 4 points here. Here's Jakucionis. Great vision.
I'm lucky to get that over for 10 seconds.
6 to shoot. Jakucionis step back 3 round.
Like I mentioned earlier, Kasparas Jakucionis is currently averaging over 5.4 assists per game, which is competitive with the best in high major D1 basketball. Jakucionis, like I said, again, works really well with his big men by setting them up, and he uses a combination of dump offs and top downs and over the shoulder passes depending on whether or not his big slips, rolls, hits a Gortat screen, or fades. And all of these things in the Jakucionis bag of tricks means his centers get very high efficient looks. And as the main ball handler for Illinois, he creates high percentage looks for his bigs most of the time in these playmaking clips, and the dump offs are especially a way for him to get those teammates involved. And as we'll show during our discussion of the finishing, his change of pace, his general shiftiness and direction on drives can lead to another defender drawing their attention towards him instead of the big, which leads to his excellent timing in hitting that big. And not to mention he throws accurate lobs as well to hit a big, and at the next level this will definitely serve him well because once again, and this is a discussion we had with the Yegor Demon thing, not only are bigs more versatile at the next level, but they understand screening and movement at a much better and nuanced level. And off the drive, he can throw high accuracy skip passes to shooters when defenders may be expecting these dump offs, and he hits people in their shooting pockets extremely well. He can also hit cutters in stride, and he tends to throw flashy and high degree of difficulty passes as well, which I would say I'm a little concerned about in terms of the risk factor. But I'm really excited about his prospects as a playmaker, especially due to his willingness to share the ball. And once again, thinking about my evaluation of Yegor Demon, although the playmaking stats are similar in terms of assists per game, I think the film shows that Jakucionis is well ahead of Demon and makes plays in the flow of the offense where I feel like Yegor was less natural. And I would note that Kasparas' handle is much more advanced than Demon's. You don't really see him losing the ball as much. And although Jakucionis' 3.6 turnovers per game is definitely a worrying number, I would say it's largely attributed to two main factors. First, his usage is so high with Illinois that it can be slightly inflated, I would say, but then also, Jakucionis struggles immensely when double-teamed. And most coaches he faces game plan to have him blitzed off ball screens, and a glaring amount of his turnovers come from when he would theoretically be in an advantageous position to make a play. And a lot of coaches, especially at the college level, preach the need to get two defenders guarding the basketball, getting some sort of mismatch to start dominoes. But I think Jakucionis runs into a ton of trouble in a trap, and this is something that will not only continue to get exposed going forward if he doesn't figure it out, and it will definitely get exposed in the league. And so despite this, I'm not as worried as I could be though about Jakucionis as a playmaker with those turnovers, given his strong handle and, as he'll get further reps, I would expect him to figure this out. I think a lot of guards, especially young guards who have the ball a lot, struggle with double teams early on in their careers, but as they work through film and work with greater coaching staffs, it's something that ends up getting resolved. And so while this is his most glaring issue in terms of turnovers, I wouldn't say it's something that would tank him towards the bottom. I think it's something that can be worked out.
Jakucionis, Ivashich off of Shaw. Well, finally reels it in for Illinois. Boswell now out to Ammerkaus in the corner.
Jonas, Ammerkaus, another big three. We're talking about the development of their offense. Basically, not at all a ball-stealing team last year. Corner, Riley.
It's Droughts. There's other dudes.
Jakucionis with the kick. And
Oh, look at that. Nice. They want to get in a situation where they can get an advantage on the backside if they can get out on the block.
Boswell hesitates. Good extra pass to White in the corner.
If it's for college students, it's free.
SIUE trailed by as many as 19 just a couple minutes ago. They've got it down to 12. Great no-look pass into Jakucionis darts into the lane, drops it off for White, who got the defender to White skips. Jakucionis to White. Off the CL tears to go from the day he tore to the day he was back on the court competing at full strength. Just incredible stuff. Ammerkaus for three. His spin.
Here's Jakucionis, player who's looked so impressive thus far, finds play resumes. Gary Booth in the corner. He sinks.
Jakucionis is extremely crafty as a finisher around the rim, and he uses his body well to create separation. And so while he's not much of a vertical threat with only 2 dunks on the season, I think in general finishing will probably be a concern going forward. But as a 78th percentile layup finisher, his craft and timing makes him someone that I'm extremely interested in as a driver, but I would say not as much as a cutter, which once again goes back to the off the ball conversation. And so without a ton of lift, he does fight an uphill battle, but is still converting at a 64% rate, which is impressive. And although he's a below the rim finisher generally, he's extremely patient and makes great use of the pivot game to get defenders in the air before working his way around them. So he makes his defender do the work for him. And I think he'll draw a lot of fouls. His step through game is one of the main components of his patient finishing, and I'm once again impressed by the footwork. He also takes around 5 free throws per game, and so once again, I would say this is expected given the amount of attention he gets, but I also think he does a good job of drawing them himself. And so I'm less optimistic about how his finishing might translate to the NBA, but I figure with his patience, he'll have plenty of opportunities to create for his teammates when in a pivot, a step-through situation, or what have you. He's also a nice finisher at adjusting midair, which I think will value him as well. And generally, the skill factor is what is much more impressive to me for Jakucionis over the athleticism, and I think it will take him far.
In those positions in the country, that they're all on the exact same page.
Yeah, Josh has done a great job. He supports them, gets them.
Conference team, which the Big Ten has done in a decent amount in the last handful of days.
Big time offense though by Alabama. 2 paint touches and 2 hard cuts off the ball for a wide open look. Jakucionis.
Ivasic finds Kasparas. Good.
His mid-range.
Kasparas with a reverse.
So on the defensive end of the ball, Synergy has Kasparas Jakucionis as a 76th percentile defender, but the film I would say doesn't really support that. I feel like he gives up a ton of open shots that likely should have gone in, so I would expect a regression to the mean soon statistically, but only time will tell. And so while, yes, he is a 6'6" guard, his size likely won't be an issue at the next level, I'm still concerned about his overall ability to hold his own when he faces more talented guards. Jakucionis has shown a lot of energy and effort on the defensive end though, which is promising, and while his screen navigation is inconsistent, he does give a lot of effort to fight through those screens, and I think the footwork is coming around as well. He lacks discipline pretty often though, and I would say although his timing is pretty good, he does jump a lot for ball fakes, and I think he should bite for these much less, but is definitely an aware defender off the ball especially. He doesn't get caught ball watching all too often, but he can still lose his man frequently when they're off the ball. And so although he has the mental tools, he's still not really showing me what I would like to see defensively. And I think that's the difference with Yegor Demon, who's simply 6'10", and so it's less of a concern. But I'm still not as sold with Jakucionis. And although he's an active rebounder and crashes for each of his rebounds per game, his best quality on defense is his timing and his ability to jump passing lanes, which makes most of his 1.3 steals per game. And so this allows him to get a high-level transition shot attempt, which is super important. And he has excellent timing on these jumps where he starts running towards the ball just before it leaves the player's hands. And so in general, I do worry about how he'll attempt to stick with ball handlers in the pros, and he might be someone that gets attacked in switches or isolations, and so he's definitely a confusing prospect. And so I'm not going to go ahead and qualify him as, a Cooper Flagg level defender, someone who has that potential all defensive team upside. But maybe I'm not as entirely worried about him either. But I do think he projects to be a below average defender. So I think Jakucionis' talent as a ball handler and a creator makes him one of the most prominent prospects in this year's draft as a guard and in general, and given his size as well, makes him a premier prospect in what I would consider to be any draft. I've only really dove into the film for him and Yegor Demon and Cooper Flagg so far, but I would still definitely have him above Yegor. His on-ball acumen will translate much better than I think Demon's will, and his efficiency against tough opponents and with a heavy workload has been incredible to watch so far, and it's impressive. And considering him to last year's draft, I think he'd easily be a top 3 prospect and could have even gone to the Wizards at 2 or maybe even Atlanta at 1, just given the resume he's put together so far in this college basketball season. And so looking ahead, I think it would take a lot to keep him out of the top 5 in this year's draft. And despite all of the shortcomings I brought up, given that the lack of defense, the lack of athleticism, and the potential ways to pick him apart at the next level, I think it would take a lot, like I said, to keep him out of that top 5. And I think at the very least, projecting wise, he'll be in that 6-man Jordan Clarkson spark plug role. But I think that's pretty unlikely. And I think the reason for that is that he can create for himself and others, and he's not going to be a complete zero on defense because of his size, assuming he puts on a little weight. But I think the difference between him and that spark plug only scoring 6-man, like I said, is that ability to get other people involved and to not be a zero. So I think he'll potentially exceed that. And I think he'll be a productive offensive player in the NBA for sure. And so the defense is really what will need to come around for him to reach what his potential ceiling could be. In terms of projections, I think at the very best, I could see him become an all-NBA guard just simply because of his ability to create for himself. And so I wonder if the best case scenario for him, though, is a winning player. You know, will he be the second or first best player on a finals team? You know, that's a lot of the things that these GMs try to decide when they're working through drafts. I think it's tough. It all rests on how well he can guard. And so for Kasparas Jakucionis, I'm confident in giving him a high lottery grade, with potentially one of those guys that teams draft with the hope of turning them into a franchise player. But there's a lot of question marks before he becomes what his ceiling is. And so I think at the very least, he's a productive offensive player in the NBA who you probably can't close a lineup with. And I think at the very best, I think at the very best, he's one of the top players in the league. And so thinking about the essence of the draft in terms of risk and return, I think he's definitely worth the risk with a top 5 selection, but I would say he's significantly less likely to reach that upside than some of the other players in this class might be.